everybody. And this is going viral, and we're going to bring in our guests. And the first one is going to be Jim Dingeman, and he's going to take over as soon as I bring him aboard. Okay. All right, everybody's here. Okay, Jim, you got it.
All right. Well, welcome to the November 23rd edition of Going Viral at GoingViral.news. My name is Jim Dingeman, and we're joined in California with Kenny Aaron. And we have here in the West Coast, Alex Stavropoulos. Well, first of all, let me just highlight some of the headlines today. And one of them is that the committee in Capitol Hill, the January 6th committee, has subpoenaed all the different right-wing groups. My favorite, the Oath Keepers, and all these other guys, the Proud Boys, they've all been subpoenaed to come up to Capitol Hill and testify. We also have a award in Charlottesville that basically awarded $25 million in damages over the 2017 rally that occurred there, which is quite significant. Now, in local news in New York State, you have Starbucks announcing an aggressive anti-union effort as upstate New York stores organize. And when I go into Starbucks, I always laugh when we say to you guys, "What local are you guys in?" And they always laugh at me when they're making their coffee for me. But, I say right on to their union organizing. Let's hope that all these industries like Amazon and all the rest of them, they get unionized, because they certainly will have a better lifestyle if they do. Now, obviously, the COVID issue is also top in the news. We've been seeing riots all over Europe regarding COVID, and we can talk about that coming out. And also, of course, with Thanksgiving on, we're going to have people going to houses where people just have to see, like who's vaccinated, who isn't. And we could possibly see a spike after that, because we still have a lot of retards who don't like to get vaccinated. And I have to be blunt about that. That's my personal feeling. But I think the biggest news story is the trial in Georgia of Aubrey and the decision last week in the Rittenhouse case. And I wanted to start off with a piece that happened last week. This is the News Hour talking about the Rittenhouse case. I had huge arguments all weekend with people that had to do with this case. So I'm going to share them coming out of here. But this is the discussion in the News Hour about the self-defense issue.
Another closely watched legal case is expected to go to the jury tomorrow. That's involving the three men charged with the murder of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. The two homicide trials are different in many ways, but as William Brangham reports, both touch on fundamental issues for the country.
Claims of self-defense are central to the defense in both of these high-profile cases. But what exactly constitutes a self-defense claim? When can you legally use lethal force against another person? Stephen Saltzberg is a law professor at George Washington University. In his career, he has served as both a prosecutor for the Department of Justice as well as a defense attorney. Professor Saltzberg, very good to have you on the News Hour. Obviously, these cases are both very different, but as I mentioned, they both have central to their defense a claim of self-defense. When someone makes that claim, what in essence are they arguing?
They're arguing that they have a right under the law to protect themselves when they reasonably believe that their own life is in danger, and that if they don't act, they could in fact be killed.
So as I mentioned, there's some similarities in these cases. Both of the shooters made that claim that they felt that they were threatened and had to use deadly force. But there's also meaningful differences in the two cases. Could you explain those differences?
Sure. They're actually, the similarities in some ways outweigh the differences. In both instances, Kyle Rittenhouse injected himself into a demonstration knowing there could be violence. He brought a high-powered rifle with him and said he did it for self-protection, even though he didn't expect to use it, he said. But he had it there because he knew he might have to. And then he got into a situation in which he thought that the first of his victims was trying to take away that gun. And if that happened, the victim would use it against him. And so he fired. And he continued to fire, kill one more person and wound another, all because he said he feared for his own life. In the Arbery case, the shooter, Mr. McMichael, who testified in the case, basically said that he was trying to make a citizen's arrest, which came out for the first time really at trial, and that in the very end, when he struggled with Mr. Arbery, they were both struggling for a gun, and Mr. McMichael feared that if Mr. Arbery got the weapon, McMichael would be the one who would be shot. And so he too feared for his own life.
So it sounds like in both of these cases, it's the person who uses the force. It's their testimony that says, I felt threatened, thus I acted.
They do not have to testify in their own defense. But when they raise self-defense as a defense, it's much harder to make out that kind of a defense if you don't get on the stand and explain how scared you really were. And that's why at least the shooters in both cases, Mr. Rittenhouse and Mr. McMichael, both chose to testify.
Does the circumstances in which that got you into those circumstances matter at all? Does it matter that you're a teenager and took a semi-automatic weapon and went to what was a violent protest? Does it matter if you were trying to execute a citizen's arrest against someone? Does anything about those circumstances that gets you to the point of a conflict matter in a self-defense case?
If you're the first aggressor, if you put yourself in a position where the person that you shoot is acting because that person really has no choice, you put that person in such danger, you basically can't make out a valid self-defense case. In the Rittenhouse case, he basically said he was there to do good. He was there to protect a car dealership. And so he wasn't trying to do anything wrong, he said. And therefore, when he felt under attack, he could fire. In the Arbery case, the defendant's claim is that they thought that there might have been a burglary and that they were also responding, not intending to put anyone in danger, a mortal danger.
Some people have argued that the Rittenhouse decision, while it may fall under Wisconsin's self-defense claim, that it could create something of a slippery slope where more people feel emboldened to go into tricky, potentially violent circumstances armed, knowing that the law has their back in some way. Do you agree that that's an issue, a concern?
I regret to say that I do. My belief is that the Rittenhouse verdict is going to have ramifications regardless of what happens in the Arbery case. And that means there are more people who are gonna say, I'm gonna be like Kyle Rittenhouse. I'm gonna go protect the community, and if I have to shoot somebody to do it, I will. I don't think they're gonna say that about Arbery no matter what happens, because it's a very different case. It really looks like 3 white men going after a black jogger. And whatever happens, people will never accept that as being a reasonable thing to do.
All right, Stephen Salzberg at George Washington University, thank you so much for your time.
All right. That's the argument made on the NewsHour last week. Now, I've listened to the closing arguments of both cases. I listened to hours of closing arguments in the Arbery case. And they, in fact, are making it a self-defense issue. The 3 attorneys who are presenting the closing statements for the 3 individuals on trial for shooting Arbery. The state, of course, has a pretty good prosecutor, and her argument is that basically there's no self-defense in the issue. And it's sort of amusing to me because with all this talk of critical race theory, which has been going on and incorrectly understood in all these ridiculous battles throughout the country, which essentially are aimed to weaken the Democratic Party in the 2022 elections, that's their real intent by bringing up this false conundrum. Well, actually, critical race theory does indeed have an interesting application into and how it really is applied into a case like the Arbery case. Because when you listen to them talk, okay, here's these guys on basically supposition, assuming that Arbery, who's running through the neighborhood, has had to commit a burglary. And after he is shot and killed, the person who killed him asked the cops, hey, why don't you go figure out who got robbed in the neighborhood? So whether Aubrey was there up to hanky-panky, who knows? But everything that they present in the case is that here's this guy running down the street, and all of a sudden he's confronted with two dudes, one of whom is about ready to, they're both trying to track him down in their pickups, and one of them's obviously armed. They all have, two of them have firearms, the son and the father, and they essentially, corner him, and he decides to defend himself. And the state is essentially saying that self-defense does not apply. Now, in the case of Rittenhouse, I had a long talk with a E7 this weekend, a Special Forces sergeant who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he felt that Rittenhouse, he was glad that Rittenhouse got acquitted. He said, two less dirtbags on the street regarding to the two guys who were killed. And, here we're dealing with a liberal, actually a pretty liberal Green Beret, although in certain cases I guess that goes out the window. And Rittenhouse, of course, went on Tucker Carlson and said that he loves Black Lives Matter. He wants to be a lawyer now. I guess he's been offered internships in the Congress. Again, it's the wrong, I hate to use, I'm going to use a Yiddish New York term, a schmagegi. A schmagegi in New York, 17-year-old armed with an AR-15 who gets caught in the wrong place at the wrong time playing cops and militia. And then in a situation like that, when he's confronted with those two guys, one guy attacking him in a gas station, well, I could see why he pulled the trigger. And at the same time, when he's on the street and some guy comes up with a skateboard, knocks him on the head or tries to knock him on the head, another guy pulls out his revolver, then he shoots the two of them. Well, I could also understand the self-defense argument there, except the problem I have to start with is why the hell is he there to start with? What's his presence there to start with?
Okay.
So let's hear Kenny. Let's hear Kenny. Kenny, you may have a different view than I do.
It was a tepid night in the summer. I mean, in the fall, Indian summer. Why would somebody go out? There were just people gathering. I think it was a festival of some kind.
Oh, give me a break.
What are you talking about? Why was he there? There was a riot. He went to protect the cars. They had already burned down cars. The documentation says $2 million worth of government loitering or damaging, and $50 million worth of public, private. There was a riot going on, so he went there to protect the parking lot and to wait a minute, and to protect and to deliver medical services because he's trained to give CPR and some other kind of first aid shit.
Well, Ken, he may also
and there's videos of him walking through saying medic.
Yeah.
But that's why he went. And if you want to say what his internal thoughts were, like he wanted to play cowboy, you can certainly have that opinion. But that's his stated that I went there to help people.
Well, it's not just his opinion, because the judge refused to allow a tape of someone that sounds recorded the day before the shooting of someone who sounds very much like Rittenhouse.
Yeah.
Sounds exactly like his voice, saying that, when he basically had been there the day before without his gun, and he's saying, he's caught on tape saying, I wish I had my AR so I could shoot them. So that suggests premeditation.
Okay,
Again, the judge did not.
Why didn't that come into court?
The judge didn't let it in.
Why not?
I guess I think the judge felt there wasn't enough proof that it was him.
Okay.
But it sounds very. They didn't. Not that they did any. Voice pattern recognition or anything.
Okay, no,
like
there's no dispute.
We don't know.
There's no dispute.
I'm not going to allow it. It's prejudicial or whatever.
There's no dispute, according to Wisconsin law for self-defense, that he had to be acquitted. Many pundits on the left thought he was going to be acquitted before it went to the jury. Yeah. And everybody said he's going to be acquitted because the first guy, if you want to talk about the characters involved and the intent, you'd have to talk about the other people who attacked him, which nobody wants to mention. And Jim, you left out there was a fourth attack, what they call the drop kicker, and he tried to shoot that guy but missed, and so he was attacked by the Ron somebody, the first guy who tried to get the gun. Then the drop kicker kicked him. Then the other guy hit him on the head with the skateboard. And if you think it's not that serious, when you come to LA, the first thing I'll do when you get off the plane is I'll introduce you to a skateboard. And then the next thing was, so the guy comes up with a gun. He's a witness for the prosecution. And he gets up there and he says, no. He didn't do anything until I put my gun to his head. Yeah, I probably would have shot him. And so he said that. That's what he said. So he shot him in self-defense. So it was self-defense. Yes, he probably, think back anything before you're 30 years old is going to be, seeking adventure and risk, and I want to get involved in life and I'll go out and pick a fight and so forth. Fine. Maybe that's his attitude, but then you could take a look at the other people's attitudes who are looting and burning and destroying property and bullying people and kicking people, Antifa and rioters and breaking windows. Not a nice bunch of guys as far as I'm concerned. So he got himself in there. He's lucky he got out. I don't think he was killed. I mean, it was a skilled, he didn't go picking people off like a sniper. And they were chasing him. The film shows it. They were chasing him and cornering him, trying to get him. Now, the story I heard, the reason they started to chase him was, I think I heard in his testimony, somebody started a waste bin fire in a waste bin, and they were rolling it towards a gas station. So when he came by, he had fire extinguishers and he put it out. So they started getting mad at him because he was, pissing on their parade, trying to stop them from their vandalism. And that's why they got pissed off at him, and they he must be a right-winger, and they start chasing him or pushing him around or whatever. I wasn't there. I'm sorry. I have evidence. I wasn't there then. I have a good alibi. Anyhow, it's not a fortunate thing, but you could go back. People are going back and saying the reason he's a white supremacist is he's stopping a Black Lives Matter rally, which is a social injustice rally where a black guy got shot and killed by the cops. And the only reason I'm saying he got killed by the cops is various news agencies have said that before the jury, after the verdict. They keep saying this guy Blake got killed. He's alive, he's paralyzed, but he's not dead. So they didn't even go to fucking check that. And there's arguments about he wasn't shot in the back because of this and that. You got to look at this stuff. You can't just take the words you hear from the media. So, and it's unfortunate. I have a viewpoint. Police are not trained. I was listening to this guy on the station. He says, I'm in the SEALs, and if we were going to do an operation, we train on it for a week. How are we going to get into the building? Who's going to do what? They go over and over and over. And he says, a police department, they get 2 hours a month of training where they sit there and listen to somebody talk. They're not drilling. They're not training. They don't know how to disarm. They don't know how to handle things. I've seen Philippine policemen handle people that were dangerous with guns and knives and just handling them with long sticks. They got like 20
Well,
foot
not
sticks.
just that.
And so,
the Bobbies in Britain, as
Yeah.
A guy with waving a knife around.
That's
They
right.
disarmed him without hurting him or anybody else. So
Alex, why don't you start to share the other stories you have, okay?
Yeah. Alex, you want to go in? Okay, hey,
right.
I want to acknowledge that's a good move, Jim, because, we could just fight about it all night.
Give me a sec, my mouse. Oh, give me a sec, my mouse is. Gotta bring it. Wait. Okay, there. Wait. Come on. It's not moving. Oh, wait, there we go. Sorry, guys. Ken, you want to, or Jim?
You want me to run something? What do you want?
Yeah, because my mouse isn't working, so I gotta wait for it to come back, and then I can click on stuff.
Which one do you want to see?
Do you have something on the lockdowns in Europe?
Yes, I do. Now, I just
because my first piece will be on that. Yeah.
Okay, let me get that. That's going to take me a second. There we go. That comes up. And join, and the lockdowns in Europe, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, let me stop sharing. All right.
Okay, you stop sharing. And I've got to do my thing here. Where's my thing? Where's my thingy thing? No, that's no good. I don't want that. I want this. It'll just take a minute. Gail's not coming on, right?
Well, I think Jim said she's going
She's going out of
going elsewhere for Thanksgiving.
Okay, so here we go, and I go here. Go here. And we're talking about the riots in Europe, right?
Yep.
Okay, on COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Screen share, advanced. I have to make sure I'm, let me pause this till I get it shared. There it is. Now let me come back here. I don't think we're here. So I've got to make sure I handle my sound here. Ah, there it is. There we go. Participants can now see my screen, so if I start it, let's see if we hear it. Yeah. Boom!
Fuck the police, somebody!
Well, I'll read that. Just, well, you can read it.
My opinion about the corona rules is that it's not acceptable anymore. We have to live with corona, so please invest in the healthcare in Holland so we can handle all the corona infection in the hospitals. People want to live, right? So that's my opinion, and that's why we're here with all the people.
Ken, we lost the video.
Oh, okay.
You jumped to the pit.
Oh, I
Enough
see.
to-
All right, I got you.
And yeah, you might want to read it.
Okay, on Friday, the country became the first in the EU to announce it would.
Weil es einfach eine Freiheit ist, dass unser Körper
The matter of freedom, the integrity of our bodies is at risk.
Das geht einfach so.
It just cannot be.
Deswegen gehen wir
That's
gemeinschaftlich
the
alle
reason
auf
why
die
we are
Straßen.
taking to the
Wir
streets
möchten, dass
together.
der Impfzwang nicht durchgesetzt wird mit 1. Februar.
We don't want the mandatory
Wir möchten
vaccine.
unsere
We
Kinder
want to
schützen.
protect our children.
Viva la
Viva la liberté!
liberté!
And the World Health Organization warned last week that Europe is the epidemic of a fourth
Epicenter.
wave. Epicenter of a fourth wave. with more than 2.1 million new cases in a single week.
We're getting reports in many countries, far too many countries right now, that health systems are overburdened, that health workers are overburdened, that hospital beds are filling up, that ICU is filling up. So, you know, you ask where we're going with this pandemic. The pandemic is far from over.
Okay, that's the end of that episode. And I think that was the head of the CDC that was speaking. Correct?
I'm not sure, Kent.
Oh, okay. So is your mouse working? Did you give your
Yeah,
mouse?
yeah. Okay.
Okay, so
So
take
let me start with actually found from a few days ago this, which goes into some of the numbers. We can start here. Good. So this is what they're concerned about. This recent jump in the past few weeks, you can see, is
cases
much worse. Yeah, in Germany, in deaths than in France or Spain or Italy. But what other people, well, the people abroad, part of what they're worried about is this, which is if we get a long lockdown across, again, 20 days, just 20 days lockdown across all the Euro, that's going to slow their GDP growth to like 0.4%, which is basically nothing. So that's going to have a serious impact on their economies. So, I mean, and these are, again, just in Austria and Germany, again, will slow GDP to 0.9% as opposed to 1.1% for the quarter. So obviously this is, and we know that this is going to also, because of what's happened in the past, is lockdowns funnel wealth upwards, especially since I haven't heard anybody in the EU talking about, doing what they did last year, which is to provide money directly to workers. If, say, their, job or they're put, temporarily out of work because of the lockdown. So obviously that's the other concern. All right. And again here, so they'll talk about, well, why Italy is they're having an increase, but they're hoping it's not as bad because, again, they've hit above 85%. And if you for those who are, think you can't vaccinate yourself out of it, the little British, well, I guess technically maybe it's still considered a colony of the British possession of Gibraltar, at the southern tip of Spain around here, they have like 130% of vaccination rate because everybody's essentially been fully vaccinated there. And some people have had third doses so far. So even there, they've had such an outbreak that they are actually canceling. Well, officially, for official events, they are canceling Christmas in Gibraltar already. So again, if with like 130% vaccination, you're still going to have cases and deaths. Then when people again like the Joe Biden's COVID expert says, we're going to have to live with the virus, then that's probably right. But here, so what else they're concerned about again here, there's a pretty good piece from Deutsche Welle, which won't play all of, we'll play maybe half of, on what's happening in the hospitals in Germany and what's really concerning there. So.
From Bavaria to Saxony, hospitals in Germany are on the brink of collapse. Medical staff in high-incidence regions must prepare for triage, and doctors will soon have to decide between life and death. There simply isn't enough staff for ICUs to manage the surge of COVID-19 patients. Hospitals are reaching their limits, especially the larger hospitals that care for the most severe patients, both with and without COVID. For medical staff, we are now in the fourth wave, and it is a huge burden. Pressure on healthcare workers is mounting. How do they deal with a system that's overloading?
Welcome to our COVID-19 special. My name is Monica Jones. Thanks for joining us.
Germany is not a third world country. In fact, it is Europe's economic powerhouse with state-of-the-art hospitals and highly qualified professionals. But the brutality of the fourth pandemic wave threatens to break the system. Well, let's bring in Katrin Meyerhofer. She's a psychological psychotherapist joining us from Munich. Professor Christian Karajanidis, a senior consultant at the Clinic for Pulmonary Medicine in Cologne. Good to have you both on the program. I would like to start with you, Professor Karajanidis, because you're there on the front line, so to speak. What is the situation in hospitals now, and how are doctors and nurses coping?
Yes, at the moment we are reaching around about 4,000 COVID patients once more on the ICU in Germany. And compared to the first three waves, it's now a little bit different in Germany. So in the northwestern parts, like here in Cologne, it's okay at the moment. The beds are occupied, but we are not overwhelmed by patients. But in the southern parts, especially in Bavaria or in the eastern parts, and especially in Saxony, they are faced really with too many patients for too less beds, and they are under very strong pressure at the moment.
Yeah, we heard earlier that the doctors in various parts of Germany have to prepare to eventually having to decide between life and death to basically perform the so-called triage. Professor Karajanidis, how do you do that? How do you cope having to make such a decision?
As I guess we should never do that in Germany. Let's say we have a healthcare system with many hospitals that are more than 1,300 with ICUs, and we have many ICU beds, and at the moment it's around about 9,000 beds who can provide mechanical ventilation, and therefore it should never come to the point that we have to decide to end one patient's life to save another life. And I guess the major point at the moment is that we have to transfer the patients from the eastern and southern parts of Germany to the more northwest part of Germany. And I guess then we will never get into this problem of triage.
Katrin Meyerhofer, as a psychologist, how to assess the situation for the doctors and nurses? I mean, they're there to save lives, to help people, but they're under a lot of strain. Is there anyone there to help them?
The PSU helpline is trying to help them. It's a peer-to-peer network, so if you feel that you're stressed out, or if you feel that the psychological pressure is too high or hard to make really hard decisions, the PSU helpline should give the option to call and reach someone to talk to. And normally you reach not a psychologist like me, but you need reach a peer. So you reach a doctor, you reach a nurse, you reach someone that just lends you his or her ear and is there. And this is trying to help them to get some relief or some understanding or some place where they can also put their pressure. And if there's more psychological help needed, always in the background there is one psychologist, I'm one of them, to give more help if needed, because we need the doctors and nurses to stay healthy, because this is the ones who save us.
Exactly. Have you noticed any change in the kind of help seeking since the start of the pandemic over the last 19, 20 months?
I think I have noticed, it's just like my subjective point of view, that in the beginning, the doctors, the nurses, they were very scared as well, because they didn't know what kind of disease is it, how will it affect us, and they were very scared. Also, to carry it home, to infect maybe their partner who has some corona disease already. So in the beginning, many doctors and nurses called because of own fears. And then in a second wave, so many clients died, so many patients died. Mm-hmm. So in the second wave, it was the stress of having these horrible pictures and a kind of moral injury so you have to decide, how long do I fight, how long do I try to keep the person alive, and when it's only agony to keep the oxygen machine on, when do I turn it off? And this dilemma, how long you try to keep someone alive, did a lot to the doctors, did a lot to seeing these pictures of suffering, did a lot to the nurses. In summer, when the numbers got down, many of the doctors and nurses noticed that they need time to recover.
Yeah,
and it's like
and now we know. Now we know. Sadly, now we know that that was absolutely right, because now they're faced with a fourth wave, and it's more brutal than ever before. Katrin Meyerhofer and Professor Christian Karajanidis, I wish you all the best. Stay strong so that you can keep helping others. Thank you so much.
All right, so that gives you a sense of what they're facing in Germany. Obviously, is rather concerning. I'll say that also tracked with yesterday. I went to see that new documentary, The First Wave, that's playing at the Quad, cinemas in on 13th Street, New York, in Manhattan, which follows the hospital at Long Island Jewish Medical Center in the first wave of COVID. Back in from basically follow them from like March to June 2020, when was the first big wave of coronavirus, and it's pretty emotional. Well, just for the doctors themselves, but also just to watch it, because going in, a lot of people are going to die, and people do die on screen essentially. So it gives you a sense of what and that was, of course, much worse, because again, like they said, they had no idea really about the virus. And we're facing the threat of virus affecting them themselves, the healthcare professionals, and their family too. So Ken,
I want to throw in a little
about in general, again, the lockdowns, the protests against them. What's your?
Oh no, I wanted to throw in a certain amount of stability here in terms of actual statistics.
Okay.
You have to cut out your sharing first.
Right.
Okay, great. And now I'm going to do that, and let me get to it. There we go. Portion of the screen, and here it is. This is a graph I made up based on statistics from, I guess, from the CDC. Can you see those numbers?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's pretty high. It's higher than I thought, the percentage of the population that became cases. And I can't tell from the material that I was using whether these were people who went in the hospital, or estimated cases, or people who reported to and called up the hospital. I don't know. But it's high numbers, whatever it is. 3.5%, 3 1/3 of the planet, got contaminated with COVID-19. And it was higher in the US and the UK, less in Germany, less in Sweden, very low in Sweden, and France was pretty high too.
Yeah.
But of the people who got it, less than 2% died. Worldwide, about 2% died. But in the US, it was 1.63, and UK 1.45. That means that if you got it, your chance of survival overall was 98%.
Right.
But
it's interesting that Germany is such a.
That it's different if you're over 60.
Yeah.
Your chances of survival might have been 80%. I don't know.
The number of Germany are interesting is, again, you had a less of a chance of getting it in the first place. But if you got it, like as compared to, say, the U.S. or Germany, the UK, you had more of a chance of dying. I wonder what that is about. Yeah.
and then, but if you look at it overall, it's really a 1/10% or 0.2%.
0.2
of the population. But
or
that's
0.25.
children, and that's everybody.
Yeah.
So it's not the Black Plague. That's all. And
or the Spanish flu. Anyway.
Right. I want to show you this one other thing here. This is very interesting. This website shows this very interesting information here, and you'll get a kick out of this. because I think at the beginning of this epidemic, people were screaming and hollering, why isn't the U.S. doing what they're doing in South Korea and so forth and so on?
Yeah.
We're the worst country in the world, that kind of a thing. And here's the actual history of the epidemic. The date's in the lower right-hand corner. Here comes the U.S. We're getting up there.
Yeah. Belgium.
And this is a per capita.
Right.
This is not total cases. It's Colbert deaths per 100,000.
Yeah, I remember Belgium. Yeah. In Peru.
For some reason, Peru is really bad.
Yeah, it was.
So the U.S. is like down about between like 40%, 60% higher. So the U.S. didn't do that bad. And now we're already into August of 2020.
Now we're going back up.
So it's coming up pretty fast. We're already here in October of 2020.
Right.
Oh, I shouldn't say that fast because we're already still got a year to go here. Let's see if I can speed it up. I can speed it up here. Whoops.
Nope. Oh yeah, Peru is good.
It's coming up March. It's going a lot faster now.
Right.
But see, the U.S. is getting better and better, going lower and lower.
I didn't realize like all the Balkan countries are not doing well here. Italy is still pretty high.
I think eventually the U.S. falls off the chart here, right there.
Right.
And these little countries.
Peru is the worst, obviously.
Covered California offers.
So that's all. I thought that was. I like.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Gives you a relative reality. Okay, back to you. You pull.
Well, let's let Jim.
Jim, you got something you want to throw up?
Hasn't said anything about all of this, so let's let him. Jim, you there? Want to unmute and?
I'm going to ask.
I got nothing.
You got nothing? Okay. I thought you might
add.
Yeah.
One.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, just as a point of information, Jim, this is the kind of thing that goes around. How many people do you know who came down with it? You did it. You had it, right, Jim?
You got to mute Jim.
He's not asked to unmute. He doesn't want to say about it. Okay.
Okay.
All right, go ahead, Alex.
All right, so let's move from there to this, which is Biden trying to do something about inflation, which probably is, I don't think it's going to go anywhere, because basically I'll explain why those 50 million barrels is basically nothing.
Right.
In comparison to the oil market. So, but here, the reporting is he just announced it this afternoon.
Breaking news from the U.S. The White House says it's releasing 50 million barrels of oil from its strategic reserves as part of a coordinated effort with several nations to curb soaring fuel prices. The Biden administration has come under increasing pressure to act. Petrol prices have more than doubled compared to a year ago. China, India, South Korea, Japan, and the UK are also releasing oil from their reserves. Live to our White House correspondent Kimberly Harkett for more on this. Kimberly, why has the president made this announcement now?
It has a lot to do with the American holiday season and the fact that the American Thanksgiving is already underway in terms of the festivities. This is an annual holiday in the U.S. that pre the pandemic would see people drive to visit family members great distances, and really is the peak travel season in the United States. And
because μύγες πηγαίνουν μέσα, κατάλαβες?
Back up to where they were before the pandemic. A lot of Americans not very happy about the high gas prices that they're paying. In California, as much as $5 a gallon. Here in the Washington, D.C. area, closer to $4. And that is particularly high and hard for a lot of working class Americans whose wages have not kept up with the inflation that they're experiencing. So the U.S. president concerned about that. He's got low approval rating numbers right now. And it's not just energy prices, but the price of food and other items that are also hard for Americans, given the rise in inflation. So this is as much a political move as it is an issue of supply and concerns about the prices as a result of those shortages.
And the question, of course, is whether it will work.
Yeah, and that's the big debate. Now, what the White House is banking on is the fact that this is being done in coordination with other countries, and that could mitigate what some are concerned is potentially going to be just a short-term reduction in prices, but that ultimately could lead to higher prices. That is what the naysayers are saying is going to happen in all of this. But the White House is really counting on the fact that this is something that is being done in coordination with other nations, as you reported. And we should point out very quickly that the strategic petroleum reserves are typically released for things like natural disaster or other sorts of issues, not usually to alleviate prices as the president is doing right now. It's about a 1-month supply, and this is a bit of a gamble for the president, but in consultation with his team, he believes it will work because he believes this is a situation created not because of policy, but because of the pandemic. We're going to wait to hear from the president. He's going to be speaking in the coming hours about this, where he's going to make his case to the American people.
Kimberly, thank you for that. Kimberly Harkett, live for us there at the White House. Well, earlier I spoke to Rudy Baroudi, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Energy and Environment Holding. He says the coordinated move will bring some level of stability to oil prices.
Basically, President Biden's decision to start releasing from the SPR is a very good move, and it is one of the strongest moves to dampen inflation threat. If OPEC Plus and the Saudis will not or were not willing to increase their production, President Biden had 3 choices. One is to ask U.S. shale industry to start boosting their production. This is one. 2, use some of the strategic petroleum reserves that are around 715 million barrels. So what they have released now is around 7. And if this is accompanied by India, China, Korea, that is going to give a major stability to the oil prices and will give the level of oil prices to an economical, sustainable way, especially after what we have seen in the COVID time.
Yeah, well, I don't agree with them because, well, and the markets didn't agree with them because today the price of the Brent, let's say the Brent crude price went up $1.44. So it's not working. In fact, if OPEC always has the choice, well, if if other countries want to release part of their strategic reserves, they can cut production and basically say, they of course want the price to remain high so that they can make money. And for political reasons, neither the Russians nor the Saudis, who of course are major oil producers, want to help Biden out here. In fact, have, sure they would want to extract something like, I think the Russians would at the very least extract from the Biden, to increase their production. That they would insist that the U.S. drop all opposition to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. which that's also having an effect on the natural gas price here, which again jumped today. So, those prices appear to be going up and look like they're going to continue to go up. So the 50 million, obviously, again, there are other countries doing it too, but 50 million.
Do you finish with your laundry?
Yeah, I'll pick it up.
Did you bring them upstairs?
But that I'm on air. I'll get it. It's literally 100 million barrels is a day's consumption. So 50 million barrels is, obviously it's significant because it's with other countries, but still, that's nothing. And again, so far it's not working. And I don't think it will. Again, it will have the effect because OPEC isn't going to go along with it. And again, maybe if all these countries want to continue to release some barrels themselves, then OPEC will just cut production, whatever the difference is, and so that will maintain the price. So there's really, there's not a way out for them. So Ken, what do you think about? I assume you got a car out there in LA, so this must be, yeah.
Yeah, well, now's the time to buy gas guzzlers because they're going to be cheap. You'll probably be able to get a Cadillac, an Escalade for like 30% off. But I don't really have an answer to it. It's complex. And, I think it's more a thing of the oil game. Like you say, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Venezuela, who's got the oil, and they want to, those countries depend on that. That's their main.
Yeah, they want to maintain the price, so they're not going to.
Yeah, I think it's more that
pump more just to benefit us. I mean, in other times the Saudis would pump more gas at our request, but after Khashoggi they don't like Biden. The Russians don't like Biden for other reasons, and other oil producers don't like him either. So they're not going to cooperate to help him out. In fact, they may be very happy to see him lose Democrats lose the 2022 and in 2024 and work with the Republicans.
higher gasoline prices or fuel prices causes inflation because everything depends on power and electricity and transportation.
Right.
And there's other things too, like plastics and chemicals and other things that petroleum products are used for. But it just is, in this case, is most harmful to the poorer you are, the worse your influence here. Because, if you have to pay $6 a gallon instead of $5 a gallon, but you're making 100,000 or more a year, that's middle class here, then, you say, okay, fine. And then whatever, I'll go to the supermarket once a week instead of twice a week.
Right.
But if you have to go in LA, what we have in LA, by the way, I don't know how it works in New York, but we have a west side that's closer to the ocean. That's where all of the wealthier people live. And on the east LA is the poor immigrants and uneducated laborers that do majority of the manual labor throughout the city. They're 50% of the population. They do the restaurant cooking, the gardening, the construction, and a very strong industry of nannies and house cleaning. But they have to come from the east side to the west side. And they have to take, public transportation or drive.
Right.
But if they're driving, it's, this is a big burden. Oh, and all of the guys, the construction workers, they've got to drive, or contractors, and have to go around the city. I've had people work on my house, and some of them come from the valley. It could take them an hour. And I say, why are you working down here? He says, this is where the business is.
Yeah.
So every day they drive an hour on the freeway back and forth. And I used to do that too. So it's really harmful to lower income population to raise the staples like water, gas, electric, anything like that. That's all I can say. I don't have an answer. I don't know what the solution is.
Ken, where I have no idea where like the KPFK offices and studios in comparison.
Where are they?
Yeah.
They're right outside Universal Studios.
Oh.
Like Burbank.
Uh-huh.
It's outside the city, and it's
right. With BAI, it's all in what Jim can tell.
It's down Fulton. It's by
downtown
Fulton
Brooklyn.
Street.
Yeah.
You know, I've been there, but New York is different because it has the subway, extensive subway network. You know, and I just have to ask this offside. Nobody's listening anyhow. You know, I think most New Yorkers, at least if they grew up in New York, at least had played hooky one day to go riding the subways all around the city to see how far they could get.
Right. Wow.
You know,
back in high school or something.
Yeah, back in high school or public school or whatever. Because it's so extensive that you take certain subways. It's like, where am I? You're in another country. You know.
Yeah, those guys are trying, break the record for doing
go as far as
traveling the entire system in the least amount of time, which is
those trains that
more
go
than
out
a
to
day.
Jamaica,
I think
the Jamaica trains
record,
are really strange, right? So, but I'm just saying that's all I know about it. I don't know. Jim doesn't want to. I would think Jim would know about the geopolitical influences or strategy with oil, but I keep asking him to unmute. He's not with
Jim.
us.
What are your? I would think you have more to say about this. So.
I don't want to come in on that. Jim. Okay. Well, let's go on.
Unless we're putting him to sleep.
No, I don't think so. I don't know. Maybe he's mad at us or mad at me. I don't know.
All right. Well, we can get someone here into.
I'm going to send him
a chat.
A Kyle Rittenhouse T-shirt.
Oh, okay.
That'll cheer him up.
Well, I don't think he's angry enough. But let's move on to another clip, which is more of a historical issue, which is these interesting cases regarding Belgian former residents of their colonies who were essentially kidnapped during the colonial period, taken to Belgium, and they're now suing. They were basically taken from their families, so now they're suing the Belgian government for
they were taken from
reparations.
Belgium. They were taken from the Congo.
Well, you'll see there. Well, I'll play it. Okay. It's an interesting. Also, why they were. But
okay, full screen, please.
I'm a fun hearing.
The photo shows Leah Tavares as a child in Congo in the 1950s. What it doesn't reveal, though, is her suffering and pain. Leah was born under Belgian colonial rule to a white Portuguese father and black Congolese mother, but mixed-race couples were forbidden, and their children were considered a threat to white supremacy. So when Leah was 2 years old, Belgian police seized her from her home and placed her in a Catholic institution far away, severing her from her family.
When we thought about our mothers, we cried. All children want their mothers. We wanted our mother's warmth, but she wasn't there.
Leah is one of 5 biracial women now suing the Belgian state for crimes against humanity and seeking compensation.
What we want the Belgian state to do is explain why they abducted us from our families and mistreated us, why they took away our rights and cut us off from our roots and the world.
Campaigners say tens of thousands of children were torn from their families in Belgium's colonies. This spanned today's DRC, Rwanda and Burundi. Some were placed in orphanages, others were shipped to Belgium. Jacqueline Gogber was 3 when she arrived in Belgium and was put up for adoption after being snatched from her mother's arms in Rwanda. She runs an association for other so-called stolen children. They're connected, she says, by their loss, trauma, and broken identities.
It is an enormous loneliness in your heart. You don't know who you are. It was racism. It was dividing races to maintain a hierarchy that was not to be challenged.
In 2019, Belgium's government apologized for the systematic segregation and abduction of biracial children. A year later, it set up a commission to examine the country's colonial history in the wake of Black Lives Matter protests.
The Commission's goal is to heal a wound. Of course, there will always be a scar, but if we don't treat this wound, it'll lead to more of the racism and discrimination we can see in Belgium today. So we must work on this.
For Leah, the government's apology isn't enough. She wants answers, reparations, and for future generations to better understand the abuses of Belgium's colonial past. Taking the state to court hasn't been easy, but after decades of silence, Leah hopes for justice. Natasha Butler, Al Jazeera, Brussels.
Well, again, that's obviously a very interesting case. And obviously it's not the only. Similar things happen in other colonies. Although I don't think obviously, the Congo has always been, pointed out as a kind of especially brutal colonial experience again, with, that the Belgians did, especially, more brutal and repressing resistance to their colonial rule, were, and would chop off people's limbs who were, not just fighting against them, but, unwilling in their opinion to work hard enough. So Ken and or Jim, what are your thoughts having listened to all that? Ken, you guys got to unmute if you want to.
All right. Well, it's just the two of us. Just the two of us, you and I. Here comes Jim. There we go. Let's give it to Jim.
Well, look, the response to colonialism is going on around the world ever since the uprisings that were sparked by Floyd's death. So we'll see what happens. I mean, this is just an example of it. Africa is a ripe target. They want to take down the Cecil Rhodes statues at Oxford. We saw the toppling of the iconoclastic responses all throughout the world to the issue of colonialism. And there's no doubt about it. Colonialism has to be properly put into the historical perspective as to the major factors of causality in the present situation. On the other hand, there has to be a recognition that governments have been in power for 50, 60, 70 years. And when do they then blame their own ruling classes inside their societies for their problems? And that's, of course, something that gets all controversial, but is in fact a reality. But yeah, it's a great story. Thank you.
All right. Ken, your thoughts?
Yeah. No comment.
All right, so let's talk a little bit then, continuing with Africa, and talk about more events in Ethiopia, where again the TPLF appears to be continuing to, get closer, although again we're still like 200 kilometers away to Addis Ababa. And again, I think yesterday or the day before, the Prime Minister Abiy actually said he was going to go to the front and maybe even fight, essentially maybe personally lead the army against the TPLF. So, but it's escalating, and now the UN is talking about, and not just UN, the French. I think the US has said something about maybe planning an evacuation of our citizens in Ethiopia. So everybody's getting concerned. So here's a clip from France 24.
Started evacuating families of international staff. This after similar calls to leave by the US, the UK, and others. Let's get the very latest with correspondent Maria Girth Nicolescu. Maria, what is the latest?
Well, telecommunications are shut down in areas where fighting is currently ongoing. But what we do know is that Tigrayan forces, as well as their allies, the Oromo Liberation Army, are continuing their offensive towards the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. They're now less than 200 kilometers northeast from Addis Ababa, fighting in a very mountainous and difficult area for the town of Debre Sina. They say their advance to Addis aims at stopping a humanitarian siege imposed on Tigray, where hundreds of thousands are believed to be facing famine, according to the UN. Meanwhile, the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said on Monday that he would himself go to the battlefield and lead the troops to victory. In this context,
Anyone downstairs to get your clothes?
Come on, a minute later.
security measures on Tuesday, the French embassy asked all its citizens to leave
the government in Addis Ababa.
No reaction so far to these decisions, but the government is continuing to say that it will be victorious, asking citizens to join the battle. It is also downplaying the risks on Addis Ababa. On Tuesday, the Addis Ababa city administration told diplomats that the city is in a state of reliable peace. The Amhara regional government is also continuing to pressure its residents to take up arms and join the fight. So the mobilization is continuing across the country.
Maria, we're getting statements from around the world. There have been mediation efforts, which so far have come to naught. The United States, after that tour by Anthony Blinken last week, reacting, saying the latest developments don't help. What more can we read into what the international reactions are?
Well, the United States have been extremely involved in the past weeks in efforts to reach negotiations or to reach a ceasefire, especially through their special envoy to the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, together with other international actors such as the special envoy for the African Union. He's been really trying to talk to the parties and convince them to end this war that's been going on for 1 year, to end it peacefully. And I think the statement by the United States, while it refuses to acknowledge complete defeat of these diplomatic efforts, it does show that so far these negotiations have not brought any tangible results, with parties still convinced that they can win this conflict militarily. We'll have to monitor the situation in the coming days, in the coming weeks, especially around Debrecen and beyond. So far, there are no signs that Tigrayan forces or Roma forces or government forces are willing to lay down their arms.
Maria Gertha Nicolescu, many thanks for that live up.
All right, so Ethiopians are not so convinced that the U.S. really wants a ceasefire here. And in fact, there have been protests by Ethiopian Americans around, I think, in New York and Washington against the U.S. Because they believe, with some evidence, that the U.S. is basically backing on the side of the TPLF and is against the Ethiopian government in this war for various reasons. Yeah, Ken or Jim, maybe you guys have any thoughts? You got to unmute, Ken.
Yeah, can you give us more data? Like, what part of the United States would favor the rebels or the people trying to knock
our
out
government?
The Pentagon, the Democrats, the Republicans.
Where do you get that assumption, Alex?
Yeah.
Well, from other comments from lefties, yes, who point out that the U.S. hasn't liked what the Ethiopia has done in getting closer with Eritrea, who we don't like because. Obviously, yes, we have worked with the Ethiopians in the past, even during the war on terror. But now, we think the logic was that they're cozying up to the Eritreans, who, of course, are one of the countries in Africa that doesn't allow any U.S. bases. So, I've seen some Ethiopians, again, particularly on its breakthrough news. They've had some Ethiopian Americans come on who are experts to criticize the U.S. government and basically argue that the U.S. is supporting the TPLF now, diplomatically and maybe even with arms.
Is there any evidence of that? I mean, I
haven't seen anything specific yet. Again, this is they're kind of assuming. Yeah,
they're assuming based on what? They're assuming based on nothing. First of all, I've read through detailed analyses of what's going on in the Horn, and I don't see it benefiting the United States one way or the other in terms of fighting between the Tigrayans and the government. In fact, the Tigrayans are pushing, along with their alliance with the Oromos, a situation which is destabilizing in the extreme. I mean, look what just happened. They cut off the main line of communications between Addis Ababa and Djibouti. So, I look on it as something, and Blinken himself has said basically he actually, I think, was when he was in Africa just last week, he talked about the need to have a ceasefire. Now, you could be right. There could be all sorts of machinations going on. My problem, of course, with most of the left-wing bloggers is their lack of knowledge about Africa in general. It's like in the toilet bowl. So, I don't really get much from those guys because they don't really study in-depth Africa, the vast majority of them now. If they're an Ethiopian, okay, fine. But then you've got so many different opinions in the United States regarding Ethiopia. You can just go on the streaming shows and watch them fight it out. Like certainly...
Well, here again, for example, is from CNN reporting on protests here in Washington.
But then look at how they cover the Sudan. Look at how they cover. I mean, it's trust me, it's Africa is as complicated a part of the world to understand as the United States is in depth. And look at how many Americans on the left really understand the United States. I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, they have their own stereotypical views about how they understand the responses of white working class, lower middle class, and middle class Americans. So, I mean, it's easier to identify with critical theory perceptions of Americans than it is to really go do the hard work and try to understand the nuances of dealing with different levels. Where does white racism and backlash come from? And then deal with that. So the same thing applies to Africa. Let's hope that peace prevails, because unfortunately I don't think it will.
Right. Okay, well, actually, I'm running out of stories.
I've got
so I hope you guys have some, but...
I have a good one. I haven't watched the entirety of this, but it looks very inviting. So let me just put that up here.
Yeah.
There we go, and then I'll just start it.
Alien ship called the Topaz. In June of 2020, this ship left the port of Queensland in Australia with 90,000 tons of coal as its cargo, and its destination was the port of Jingtang, where it was set to unload its coal and then travel back to Australia over the course of several days. But that's not what happened, because once the Topaz reached the port of Jingtang, it was not allowed into the Chinese port. So the ship waited. 1 month passed, 2 months, 6 months, then 10 months. And eventually the ship and all of its crew found itself being stranded at sea for nearly an entire year with no end in sight. And as it turns out, this event would foreshadow one of the biggest economic issues that we are currently witnessing today. But to explain why this event happened, why this event is also so important, and why it's creating a global economic crisis today, you must know that this crisis that we are currently experiencing may have actually started with a small bird just a few decades ago. A bird that caused one of the biggest crises of the 20th century. This is the Chinese sparrow. In the 1950s, the Chinese government didn't know much about these birds except for, well, one thing. And that thing was, well, they found out that these sparrows ate on average 4 pounds of Chinese grain per year. Now, on its surface, this may not seem like much, especially when you consider that all of the sparrows in China consume only a very small fraction of 1% of the grain in China. But at the time, the Chinese thought that this small fraction of a percentage was too much. You see, China in the 1950s was trying its best to adopt communist economic policies while becoming completely self-sufficient in regards to agriculture. So, in order to accomplish their goal, they banned privatization of all agricultural products within the country. They also decided that all of the food shall be collected and distributed by the government. They also changed their farming techniques to match that of the Soviet Union. They decreased crop diversity to help boost production quotas. And lastly, they stopped trading resources with all Western nations in hopes of becoming completely self-sufficient. And all of those policy effects took place virtually overnight, which caused a massive shock to China's agricultural system. And soon, China would begin to experience a decrease in their food production, as well as a very serious national famine. However, there was one thing that would push this crisis over the edge, and that, of course, was the sparrow. You see, remember how the Chinese government didn't like that sparrows ate a small amount of their grain? Well, as it turns out, the Chinese government decided to order the extermination of all sparrows from the country in hopes of boosting food production. And so, over the course of just a couple years, millions of sparrows in China were killed, and as a result, the sparrow became nearly extinct. And it would not take too long before China realized it had made one of the largest mistakes in the country's history. This one single policy change ended up making their famine substantially worse. You see, what China did not know was that sparrows were the main predators for all of the pests in their crop fields, meaning that as soon as the sparrows went away, the crop-eating pests, mainly locusts, began swarming the entire country. And these locusts were not eating just a small fraction of 1% of the food like the sparrows were. These swarms of locusts literally destroyed entire farms or even villages of crops at a time. So it was this event that ended up making the famine in China turn into the Great Chinese Famine, a crisis that caused tens of millions of people to starve to death over a 5-year span. And remember, all it took was a few policy changes and one hasty economic decision to cause a crisis on a massive scale. And well, that brings us to today. Remember that ship, the Topaz, that we last saw being stranded at sea in China? Well, as it turns out, this was also because of a hasty economic decision that came from the Chinese government. You see, in June of 2020, just a few months into the pandemic, the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison—
Who becomes a Twilio developer? People who code as a side hustle. People who lead big—
called for an investigation into the origin of the pandemic in China. Now, on its surface, this may not have seemed like much of a story at the time, but in reality, this would be the instigator for the global crisis that we are seeing today. This is because China did not take this criticism of the Australian Prime Minister very well. In fact, because of a handful of seemingly minor sentences from the Australian Prime Minister, China decided to start a trade war with Australia. And again, on its surface, there should have been a clear winner of this trade war, as China's economy is roughly 10 times larger than that of Australia's, but what China did not realize was how reliant it was on Australia. You see, China ended up banning or placing high tariffs on things like barley, beef, and about a dozen other Australian products. And as it turns out, one of these banned items was coal. And so, well, that is why in June of 2020, as the Topaz and 60 other bulk carriers were on their way to China, they all of a sudden were not allowed into Chinese ports with their coal, because, well, China overnight banned and canceled all of their trade deals in relation to coal. Now, to most Western nations, coal isn't that important to their respective economies and infrastructure. For example, countries like Canada, France, the UK, and the Nordic countries produce less than 10% of their electricity from coal. And even on the upper end of the Western nations like the United States and Germany, they only produce about 15 to 20% of their electricity from coal. But then we have China. And well, China produces over 65% of its electricity from coal, meaning that the less coal China has available to them, the less likely it'll be able to produce electricity for its country. Now, China is actually the world's largest producer of coal, and roughly 75 to 90% of all coal used in China is produced domestically. However, for coal that is used for industrial processes, like the making of metals, and for a large fraction of its coal power plants, China is reliant upon coal imports from other countries in order to fulfill its needs. And well, who do you think was at the top of that list for coal imports to China in 2020? It was, of course, Australia. Before the coal ban, China was importing roughly 78 million metric tons of coal from Australia per year, and to put that in perspective, the next closest nation was Indonesia, where they were importing roughly 48 million tons of coal. And so, slowly, from June of 2020 up until today, China's coal reserves kept depleting, in part due to stopping the imports from Australia. Now, it's also worth noting that during this time, there was some major flooding in southern and eastern Asia that caused many Chinese and Indonesian coal mines to close down. There were also a handful of other policies, such as increasing the safety guidelines for coal companies in China, that also decreased coal production. And so, because of one hasty policy decision against Australia and a few other environmental and policy events, we started to see just a few months ago that Chinese cities began going dark. Power outages began affecting factories and homes, supply chains began getting severely disrupted again, and Chinese banks that had loans with these coal companies began seeing the signs of defaults on these loans. And as this began happening, China began implementing new policies such as ramping up coal production in their working mines and also importing more coal from other nations that weren't Australia Australia. They also began mandating cutting electricity consumption from factories and residences, and also made their banks start making extremely risky loans to new upstart coal companies in China. But at the end of the day, none of those short-term solutions worked, and China was forced to do something that it did not want to do. Remember those 60 or so Australian bulk carriers that were stranded in China? Well, as it turns out, China became so desperate for coal that just a few weeks ago, they allowed some of those stranded ships to unload their coal into Chinese ports. Now, it's also worth mentioning that some Australian ships are still stranded after being at sea for well over a year. And many of these ships also got rerouted to different countries like India and South Korea, who ended up actually buying a lot of this stranded Australian coal. But the effects of this Chinese energy crisis, and what it should be called, which is the Chinese coal shortage, are being felt worldwide right now. Many large companies that are reliant on Chinese manufacturing are seeing similar or even longer delays than what they were seeing at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. In fact, there have been a handful of large corporations that have begun switching their manufacturing out of China and into other countries or even domestically, largely because companies are realizing that manufacturing in China is becoming more unreliable. And because of decisions like this and the shutdown of some factories and the electricity shortages, China's manufacturing industry shrank for the second time in modern history this year. And so, where is this all going? Well, this coal crisis is already taking a chunk out of China's economy and will likely do so for the foreseeable future. And despite this ongoing energy crisis, China still refuses to lift the ban on Australian coal simply because of a few sentences said over a year ago. And a few recent quotes from a Chinese energy specialist and a Chinese coal data company stated that the biggest provinces now only have 9 to 14 days worth of coal reserves left. And with winter coming soon in China, the country will have to make a tough decision. Will it potentially allow power outages in winter and a continual shutdown of its core economy simply because of those few sentences said by the Australian Prime Minister? Or will it lift the bans on Australian coal, admitting that the government made a hasty decision that ended up creating an energy crisis that the country didn't expect? What do you think will happen? And all this means is that China has a few weaknesses. And those weaknesses are its energy consumption and its irrational and hasty economic policies. And as it turns out, Australia, the seemingly innocuous Western nation, ended up accidentally revealing the weaknesses of China to the world. It also revealed that Australia is one of the very few nations that can influence China's economy directly to the point of a national crisis. And who knows, maybe as Australia and other Western nations continue to get closer, we may begin to see a further divide between China and the Western world. Now, I just want to make one more quick note, and that is a video game that I am developing now officially has a Steam page. So if you do want to support this channel, just go and check that out and maybe leave a wish list on Steam. That really helps out a lot. But for now, remember to check out my documentaries playlist if you want to see more videos like this. And please leave a like and subscribe, because still over 90% of you that watch my videos are not subscribed to.
And that's the end of that video. And, okay, yeah, kind of interesting. The viewpoint of it isn't only political systems and personalities. It's, it's commerce and the integration of supply and demand, things going around the world and everything. It isn't just social justice. It's like a more economic phenomena.
Oh, sure. I think where's the side that China's still growing faster than Australia, than the U.S. So, and did much better with COVID. And again, it's not like there aren't other countries that have the minerals that Australia has that they can buy, China has their own stranglehold on things like rare earth minerals that everybody needs too. So that can work both ways. If we're on, a total, how we're going to ban their economic trade with them entirely, then we won't be able to make our cell phones because, again, of those specific rare earth minerals that they dominate.
Yeah. I was thinking.
It cuts both ways,
Right. Cuts both ways. Okay, Jim, you got any comments about the Chinese over-reliance on foreign coal? No. Okay. I have. Let's play between you and I, Alex. I have a piece on Massachusetts. No. Forget that. Fentanyl and meth seizure in San Diego,
Okay.
record breaking.
I got a thing on North Dakota, our friends in Texas, banning certain histories in school, in connection with critical race theory. This is from Tom Hartman's he has a good piece talking about.
It's his piece. Oh, he's in favor of critical race theory, right?
No, well, he's opposed to banning history more, and I'm sure you've listened to him every so often, so you know what his politics are like.
Tough, yeah. It's tough to listen to him, but okay. Yeah, go ahead, play it.
All right, let me. Well, again, it also gets into our, we've been talking about critical race theory for a while, so here's one take. A left, but I don't, somewhat radical take on, again, we know Tom's politics, like I said.
This whole, in the largest sense, this is about the issue of race in the United States, which has been a contentious issue ever since the 1600s, and ever since this was first colonized by Europeans who had unwilling Africans with them to hold in slavery, and then began killing Native Americans in order to take their land. I mean, this is the history of Europeans on North America. It's a history of genocide, murder, rape, enslavement.
All that good stuff.
And I don't think any rational person would deny that. But I got to tell you how far this has gone. Judd Legum is writing about this today in his newsletter, popular.info, his popular information newsletter. North Dakota, just this week, signed, Governor Doug Burgum, the Republican governor of North Dakota, just signed an anti-critical race theory law. You may not teach critical race theory in our elementary and secondary schools. In other words, public schools, no, you can't do it. Which is kind of weird because it wasn't being done, right? There is no critical race theory being taught in any school anywhere in the United States outside of law school. I mean, this is a law school course. It has to do with how laws are constructed in ways that perpetuate racism, things like redlining, for example. That's the kind of stuff they study in critical race theory. But the law redefines it. The law that they signed says, and I quote from the law, "For purposes of this section, critical race theory means the theory that racism is not merely the product of learned individual bias or prejudice, but that racism is systematically embedded in American society and the American legal system to facilitate racial inequality."
I'll skip this.
And you can't, end of quote, and you teach about that. A school district or public school not include instruction relating to critical race theory or any portion of the district's required curriculum or any other curriculum offered by the district or school. So now in North Dakota, high school students may not learn what redlining is or was. It's illegal. Perhaps more interesting, and by the way, 28 states have introduced bills that are similar to this, and let's see, so far this year, 28 states, and 8 states have already passed laws similar to North Dakota's. So this is not some weird outlier thing. This is happening. So what does this mean? Well, in North Dakota, there's a whole bunch of land that was taken from the Sioux and the Arapaho. And back in 1868, there was a treaty between the Sioux, the Arapaho, and the United States government that designated the Black Hills of North Dakota as, quote, unceded Indian territory for the exclusive use of Native people, end quote. And then people ignored it, and they just took that land. In some cases, it was, just private white people. In other cases, it was the state of North Dakota, and in some cases, it was the federal government. And so in the 1980, this went before the United States Supreme Court in a case called the United States versus Sioux Nation of Indians in 1980. And the Supreme Court ruled, and I'm quoting from that ruling, quote, that the U.S. had illegally appropriated the Black Hills, end quote. And the Supreme Court awarded these two Native American tribes, they awarded them $100 million in reparations. Now, the Native Americans said, no thanks, we don't want your money, we want the land. And this is still, in some ways, kind of up in the air. But that story I just told you, this is the actual history of North Dakota, may not be taught in North Dakota public schools anymore. How does this further having an informed and well-informed, intelligent, thoughtful populace? How does preventing this kind of history, preventing our children from learning it, do anything? How, in North Dakota schools now, it is illegal to teach that there was a time in the United States prior to 1954 when every school in the country was segregated. Basically, every public facility was segregated. It's now arguably illegal to teach in North Dakota. The Brown versus Board of Education, 1954 case. It's illegal to teach the Plessy versus Ferguson case. It's illegal to teach the history of slavery.
Jesus.
This is critical race theory. You may not, in North Dakota and 7 other states now, you may not discuss how the law perpetuated racism, segregation, discrimination, redlining. You may not discuss it. What the hell are these white people so afraid of? I mean, what's next? Is the next thing going to be we can't teach critical gender theory? I mentioned last week was my 49th wedding anniversary of mine and Louise's, and we were married in 72. In 1972, Louise could not get a credit card without my signature. Now, I don't know if that was the law or if it was the policy of credit card companies, but they actually made a law in 73 that undid that. But women couldn't sign contracts. In 1972, a woman couldn't legally get an abortion in most parts of the United States. This was the year before Roe v. Wade, the year we got married. So is what's coming next that you're going to have a bunch of white men writing laws that say, you may not teach the history of legal discrimination against women. You may not teach that there was a time when women couldn't vote in the United States. That all changed in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. You may not teach. Is that next? What else don't they want us to know? They don't want us to know the history of racial discrimination and slaughter, frankly, in the United States. They don't want us to know the legal rationalizations that were used for it. Because why? Because the whites, let's just tell the truth about this. White supremacists in these states do not want their children. Let me rephrase that. White supremacists in these states want their children to grow up to also be white supremacists. And at a certain level, if you have any intelligence or compassion or understanding of, or consideration for your fellow human being, that means that you can't know the history. Because if you did, you'd say, whoa, this is wrong. I'm just boggled by this. By the way, the state legislator who authored this law is a fellow by the name of where'd it go here? Casper, Kasper, Congressman Casper, or Representative Casper. And Casper and Judd Legum notes in his newsletter today at popular.info, Casper and the 7 co-sponsors of the legislation banning teaching basically anything having to do with the racial history of the United States as it applies to law have received political action committee contributions from Marathon Petroleum, the National Association of Realtors, BNSF, Caterpillar, and Bayer, the pharmaceutical company. It's amazing. I mean,
all right, Ken. So do you agree with Tom? Is that what's going on here, where this is about perpetuating white supremacy for your kids and grandkids?
I think I definitely think that's what Tom Hartman thinks.
Well,
he's really behind this. He's really, really, really behind this. But it's kind of like there's a lot of insincerity here and marketing and pushing an agenda, which I don't want to get into. It. It's a big, long discussion. And, most people get vehement about it. Like, right away we're going to start talking about genocide or the Holocaust or Hitler or Nazis or Emmett Till and so forth. So they took down last week, they took the statue of Teddy Roosevelt in front of the Museum of Natural History in New York
finally
City.
did? Oh, Gail will be very annoyed because she was arguing with us about that when they were first talking about taking it down. So, she'll be annoyed about that. Yeah.
He had a mustache that was very offensive to some people, whatever. So I was surprised that they haven't canceled Thanksgiving, because we know that Thanksgiving was not
Indigenous Peoples Day.
Indigenous
and
Peoples Day, right?
That's what'll be next.
Yeah, that's so,
and Columbus Day.
All right, well,
all right, Jim. I know you.
Very interesting.
All right,
but,
well, look,
but
always
race theory. I've gone through it.
All right, well, look, always around Thanksgiving, anybody on Pacifica decides to, okay, good opportunity. Let's go bang on the Plymouth Pilgrims. Let's go bang on the Jamestown landings, and then on the Black Hills. Let me analyze that one.
Yeah.
How can you teach Custer's Last Stand? We'll use the Battle of Little Bighorn, Custer's Last Stand.
Yeah.
I mean, the Black Hills are part of that whole story. So if you're going to talk about how Custer wound up dead in 1876, well, you sort of have to put into the mix the Black Hills expedition. And if you don't do that, you're a fucking dope. So, and then the issue of, critical race theory, I've had enough of listening to these dumb motherfuckers talk about this shit. We're gonna have to bring on the actual people who write critical race theory and have them explain how they perceive this stuff, because this is all, it's easy for any Pacifica person to come on and bang the drum on white supremacy this, white supremacy that, and the issue of when you actually read critical race theory tracks going back to the 70s and 80s, the cases that we're experiencing right now are just poster child for these kind of people to go nuts. In fact, one of the proponents of critical race theory at Columbia Law School, I guess he's in the middle of trying to create a podcast himself.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is Kendall Thomas. So he can go at it and sit there and argue about all this. But I'd really love to get Kimberly to talk about this. Kimberly Crenshaw, she's delightful. She actually goes back and forth between UCLA Law School and Columbia Law School. She lives in Los Angeles. But she'd be good. Kendall would he's a little more difficult to deal with, but he'd be interesting too if I could get to him. I'd like to actually hear what the hell they think about all this stuff. And then, when you talk about, it's an interesting question. They're going to have a seminar on Howard Zinn's People's History.
Oh, okay.
And, I read that pretty carefully.
Jim, meaning who's going to have?
That's going to be at the Talent Library at NYU. For all I know, they already did it. I think it's after Thanksgiving.
In person or?
No. There's going to be. They may be doing it this week. I forget. They could have maybe even done it. But the problem with that book is that that has 2 to 3 million people bought it. A very popular book, published in all sorts of different languages, and that essentially encapsulates the kind of arguments being made by those that are saying, "Oh my God, like it attacks America and all this stuff." And actually, this past weekend in New Orleans, Neil Ferguson, Mr. History Boy, made a rather wild speech about how everybody should worship Winston Churchill and how America should just accept that we're a colonial empire and be done with it. And why do Americans beat up on themselves? And then, of course, he brought up, and he actually snarled, that vile piece of history written by Howard Zinn. And, this is ridiculous.
As if Britons didn't, criticize their own imperial.
No. His whole argument. He was annoyed. He was explaining why Michael Howard didn't agree that he should get the Cicelli chair at Oxford for military history, and basically he was saying that Michael Howard. Now, Michael Howard, this is to Kenny. Michael Howard's really the most important military historian after World War II, the most brilliant one. Yeah, and the guy was a gay. I didn't realize he was gay until I met him at Yale. Then that's, oh my God, the greatest military historian in the world is gay. But anyway, but he essentially said to Ferguson, well, you just do financial history. That's not military history. And Ferguson quite rightly said, well, wait a minute. What about the fact that you got to pay for those weapons? And so Ferguson was right. Yeah. But then Ferguson went out to this big rant about how America's attacking itself. Look at the question they're raising. Is diversity more important than this? And I said to myself, go fuck yourself, Neil Ferguson, because, you don't understand the United States. You think you do, but, go screw yourself. And it was funny. I sent the piece up to 2 friends of mine who teach at Harvard. And they will not be named because they're actually in the same department that Ferguson is in. I said, you got to check this out, guys. This was absolutely hilarious. And they both, one of them emailed me back big LOL, LOL, LOL. But, I don't know what to say about this. It's an interesting question because when Americans have to think about, quote, white supremacy put forward in their faces, okay, there's absolutely no doubt that when you read about the Age of Discovery, you read about the implementation of slavery, you read about the development of slavery, you read about the laws and actual history of the United States, well, attitudes of white supremacy were unabashedly stated and legalized and codified into law. So if anybody wants to ignore that, they got their heads up their stupid fucking asses, period. Now, how do you move and have a well-adjusted and balanced kind of society in the 21st century? Well, you got to recognize that stuff. At the same time, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, the ideas of Thomas Jefferson about equality, yeah, he was a slave owner. All the founding fathers, most of them were slave owners. Yet, their ideas of democracy, they're sort of interesting to take account of. So you have to balance it out. You have to pay attention to those awful ruling elites who, at the same time, you got to do the bottom-up history. And since they haven't thought this out, this is a dilemma that goes on from the 60s to the present time in how we try to understand our history. Until this is resolved, look, we could be on the verge of a civil war the way things are going. And so, I take it pretty seriously and really look forward to having to talk to reactionary Americans and try to persuade them to change their minds. I'm looking forward to the midterms. Anyway. Alex, I have something I want to share with you guys.
Okay, well, let me just, I found the piece that I had on Gibraltar. So just again, to get back, for a minute to the COVID stuff. Yeah, so this again is interesting because again here, Gibraltar, again, the British territory, which again, just 33,000 people is having, per cap, high. Oh. And they're canceling Christmas. But again, the interesting thing is...
not exactly a big place, Alex.
Yeah, but still, again, 139% with, again, so almost everybody's fully, well, I guess except infants is vaccinated. And, again, at under 39%, that means, whatever, close to 40% have had a third shot. But again, they're still having, and here again, the UK vaccination 82%, and of course they're having cases. So again, it just goes to, again, the idea that, well, with breakthrough cases, you're not going to vaccinate your way out of COVID. But yeah, you go with your.
Well, the problem with that, Alex, is that, again, I don't think we have on the phone call with us Kenny.
Steve,
I don't think you're an anti-vaxxer. Is that correct?
No, I'm not an anti-vaxxer.
All right.
I
So luckily tonight we don't have any of our anti-vaxxer colleagues with us. You know, look at the practical facts of this. You know, like basically herd immunity has been essentially sabotaged by all this ridiculousness that we're seeing. And I know when you started the show, when you're talking about all these anti-COVID riots in Europe, which are quite extraordinary, again, they're tied into the right. And it's funny, when I was having an argument with somebody on the left about this, I said, wait a minute, man. Like, you're giving me the same kind of arguments that these right-wing kooks give me. So, you know, where are you coming from, man? But anyway, I wanted to just share this. This has to do with the decision in let's see. This has to do with the decision in Charlottesville.
Oh, yeah.
Where Heather's mom, I believe, wanted a hefty sum, and and of course, who knows what's going to happen with the Ahmaud Arbery stuff. I mean, Rittenhouse, a different kind of situation.
Yeah.
Again, Schmagegi with the AR-15 walking down the street. We should keep in mind that there is a case going into the Supreme Court that could open up New York State to this.
Right.
And you can imagine if you could walk around New York City with an automatic weapon. I mean, that's insane. You got enough nuts in here to start with. But anyway, let's play this. This is them talking to Heather's mom. Heather, of course, was killed she was the one who was knocked out by the car. Heather Heyer in Charlottesville.
Black man, Ahmaud Arbery, just wrapped up its first day of deliberation. It's one of 3 cases we're focused on this evening. All have captured the attention of Americans across the political spectrum and delve into issues of either race or far-right extremism. And also, importantly, whether we're too divided as a nation to agree on an appropriate definition of the word justice. I'm John Berman, in for Anderson. We'll get to the men charged for killing Ahmaud Arbery in a moment, but we begin with the breaking news on a pair of legal cases that involve 2 of the most tragic episodes of violent right-wing extremism in this country's recent history. First, in Charlottesville, Virginia, where a partial verdict was announced just hours ago in a civil case brought against some of those involved with that 2017 Unite the Right rally that left one woman, Heather Heyer, dead. In a moment, we'll hear reaction from her mother. First, though, CNN's Ellie Reeve joins us now. Ellie, what can you tell us about the verdict?
Well, the jury was hung on the question of federal conspiracy charges relating to a law passed in the 1870s to fight the KKK. But they did find these guys liable under a Virginia conspiracy law. And that's really interesting because the other defendants took great pains to say they never had any contact with James Alex Fields, who was convicted of first-degree murder for driving his car into a crowd and killing Heather Heyer. He's serving a life sentence. What it means is that the jury finds that, at least in some part, the leaders of the group who glamorized violence or planned for it at the event are in some way responsible for those who came to the event and participated in that violence.
And Ellie, I should note, you were there that night. You were there in 2017. You are there now to see this jury's decision on this. And there's a lot of money at play, a lot of money. What can you tell us about that?
There is. So there are 2 parts of that weekend. There was a torch march, which had no permit, and there was a rally, which did have a permit. Those who participated in the torch march are being held responsible for a lot more money than those that did not. Another strange thing is that on the conspiracy charge, and that's the one that hits all the defendants, they've awarded very low numbers for compensatory damages, $1 or $0. But they awarded $500,000 or $1 million in punitive damages. And the Supreme Court has held that the ratio between those 2 has to be a lot smaller, like at most 1 to 10. And so that means that the judge will possibly have to lower that from 6 figures to 2 or 3.
Oh, that's interesting. So this number could change. The total number is over $20 million now, but that number could be brought down substantially, which impacts, I suppose, my next question, Ellie, which is it likely that this case, the outcome, will have what the plaintiff's side wanted here, which is to be a deterrent for white supremacists organizing in the future?
Well, it clearly sends a message that for people who explicitly call for violence, there could be consequences if somebody is inspired by that to do it. Most of the people involved in this case have quit organizing. Richard Spencer says he hates the alt-right and it hates him back. Defendant Matt Heimbach has been talking to me about the long-term consequences of this. He, during this trial, got fired from McDonald's because someone saw him on the news and figured out that he was a professional racist.
Wow.
So yeah, like a lot of these guys are out of the movement, but the old money white nationalists behind the scenes who funded them and nurtured them, they weren't involved in this case. And so they're still out there.
Huh. Well, Ellie Reeve, as I said, you were there that night in 2017. You're there tonight. I imagine there are more chapters in the future you'll be covering as well. We appreciate the work you're doing on this.
Thank you.
As we mentioned, one woman was killed during that 2017 rally. Her name was Heather Heyer, a 32-year-old paralegal. She was killed when one of the defendants drove his car into a crowd of counter-protesters. That man is now serving multiple life sentences. We're honored that Heather's mother, Susan Bro, could join us tonight. Susan, very nice to see you. We appreciate you being with us. When you heard what the jury decided today, what went through your mind?
Well, my first question was trying to understand why they were not convicted on 1 and 2, and it took a while to parse out that was federal related. But yeah, I was glad the jury was able to recognize that. I mean, even when the evidence seems very clear, you can't always determine what a jury is going to say or do. So I was glad they were able to recognize the preponderance of evidence definitely showed the clients to be guilty. And the evidence was their own words. That was the beauty of the case, that Integrity for America spent a great deal of time finding the defendant's own words to use in the case.
So this partial verdict, and obviously the previous criminal trial of James Fields Jr., does this feel like enough accountability for you? Is this what justice in your mind looks like?
I guess I don't know that we ever feel justice in a murder case. This is the first, and God knows, I hope the only murder in my life. I don't know that you ever feel complete justice, but I don't know what else could be done. I think that this speaks volumes to trying to set things straight.
Trying to set things straight. What is it that you hope that people take away from the jury's decision today in terms of any larger message about what is and isn't acceptable in this country?
Well, the defendants seem to want to argue that their speech was protected by First Amendment rights. And I would say speech is protected. Action from that speech is not protected. So when you speak and you yourself and others act on that speech, it is no longer protected. It's funny because I've often said, think before you speak. So yeah, definitely in this case.
What about?
All right, so you have Heather Heyer's mother talking about that. And of course you have those catchy phrases, Jews will not replace us. And that other catchy phrase, blood and soil, which, I don't know about the Republican Party, those elements that sort of mollycoddle these guys, but, they love to bring up patriotism and World War II and all that. Blood and soil? I mean, wow. One can see the Storm Abteilung, the stormtroopers of Hitler marching, singing the same old songs. So it's quite amazing to me to watch this go on and then listen to the GOP. Some of them, they're just a few good guys. I mean, this is just amazing stuff. But anyway, the hell with them, and I'm glad that we have to fight them and battle them, because those kind of guys, what are you going to do? Whenever I actually brought guys like that on the radio, like 25 years ago, I would let them do what they want. I'd say, look, you have the right to say what you want. So I'd let them come out with their crazy shit, because usually that will dig their own grave. You listen to the crazy shit they say, and then afterwards, I'd say, okay, and then I would generally spare them from the masses because then, of course, the red lines would lit up because the masses wanted to go take a hit on them. And I once let that happen. It was absolutely wild, as you can well imagine. New York audience went nuts.
On
But
BAI, Jim?
oh yeah, late at night. It was after 12 o'clock at night. So Whisker and I were laughing our asses off when we were doing it. But we basically we said to him,
I
we
was
didn't
like
agree with you.
far right going against far left, huh?
Well, it was like usually what's amazing about this is usually black friends of mine were more willing to have a dialogue than white individuals because they were like, oh my God, these are fascists. Why are you letting them on the air? And I said, well, unfortunately, these people represent a certain opinion in the United States that has to be thought about and dealt with realistically on its own terms. This is especially after the Oklahoma bombing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. It's just the January 6th insurrection seems more and more that we are going to see that Trump had essentially his plans for a coup d'etat. I remember I said that in the fall as he was attacking the election process before January 6th. And so none of this surprises me one damn bit.
I think Ken was there, but we had those guys on who were warning us.
I
thought
think
he was gonna do that, turned out to be,
Alex, anybody logically watching what he's up to, it's just like, give me a break. This guy, I mean, supposedly he had Mein Kampf under his pillow, according to his first wife, his first wife, his first wife. The Czech said that.
The Ivanka, yeah.
Ivanka said that. So, come on, Mein Kampf. I mean, it's not exactly bedtime reading.
Ivanka's his daughter.
To read Mein Kampf.
Yeah.
I do recommend it to somebody to read critically, but it's again not bedtime reading. So it's amazing to listen to this stuff. But anyway, I'll shut up now because we're nearly out of time. But
let's let
take
Ken
us out.
know
Then I'm going to close it, and I'll come back. And we'll talk about what we're going to do after this. So,
any comments?
Oh, I don't have any comments. No.
All right.
What were we doing? You're talking.
Well, on that note, I'm going to thank everybody for the November 23rd edition of Going Violent News. Thank Alex and Ken. For taking full command of this. I was too entertained by listening to people in Los Angeles argue, which was a lot of fun. And in any event, you guys have a good evening and good night and stay tuned.
Okay. There we go. Okay. And yes, folks, we're going to play a video for you, and that'll be the end of the show. Outro. Here we go.